Hello, welcome.
Hi, good to meet you.
Yes, it's so great to connect with you today. If you wouldn't mind sharing your full first and last name and where you're calling in from and your title.
Well, and then in my private practice, I work with trauma clients.
Gotcha,
So I'm
gotcha.
a trauma therapist. Yeah.
Fantastic. And what brought psychedelics into your world, and how is that integrated into your therapy practice? But also, kind of what brought you to discover them in the first place?
Yes. So I'm from Hungary. This is where the accent is from, and I have been in
Okay.
Canada.
I was wondering.
Yeah. So I have lived in Canada for 7 years now, and before that, I lived in Hungary, and I had a business career. I was a corporate trainer and coach. I had my own business, and so that's like kind of the professional background that enables me to work as an executive therapist for Numinus, because I'm also familiar with the business setting. So that's a nice combination. And in Hungary, I was only using psychedelics for my own healing. And it started in 2008 when I found a therapist actually here in Vancouver working with LSD. And
Mm.
I was struggling with my depression basically all my life. It's a birth, very early childhood trauma situation.
Mm.
And even though at that point I had already been in therapy, well, in 2008, I was 33. So since the age of 19, I don't know, you calculate it, for 14, 15 years or something. And I did try all kinds of modalities, talk
Mm.
therapy, psychodrama, movement therapy, everything. I still couldn't come out of my depression. And then I heard about this person here in Vancouver working with LSD, and I flew to Vancouver to work with him. So this is how
Oh,
it started. And
wow.
I and then following my big LSD experience, I when I went back to Hungary, I was looking for ways to stay in touch with the experience, and that's
Mhm.
when I started my meditation practice. Following the recommendation of my therapist, he said that that was the best way to stay in touch with the experience, and then in those years, so I mean, seriously, it's like history, right? 2008, nine, something like that. It was not like now, but there were some ayahuasca retreats available in Hungary. There were some people coming from, I think, Ecuador and offering retreats. So that was like kind of my other way of helping to process and integrate the LSD experience, which is like huge. It's a high dose LSD experience that I had.
Mhm.
And then in the processing and integration, still in Hungary, I got acquainted with psilocybin. So I had some guided psilocybin experiences with some friends, and then MDMA. So I have always used psychedelics in a very conscious way. The recreational use for me came much later, funnily enough. So my entry point was the healing aspect, and then eventually, of course, I ended up with Burning Man type of people. But that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, yeah,
So this
yeah,
is how
yeah.
I ended up, and then by I think it was by 2012 when I got really tired of my corporate career, and I just didn't envision myself working as a corporate coach in my 50s and 60s. It didn't feel like a good, you know, kind of a setting for me to grow old and to become a senior in the field. I just didn't like that image.
Mm.
Um, and I would say, yeah. First, the idea came in 2012 that I would leave Hungary, and then eventually I realized it's because of politics mostly, um, and also because of my childhood trauma. It was just nice to have a distance from my traumatic place.
Mhm.
And within 2 years, I realized that, okay, it's not only the country that I am going to change, but I'm going to change my profession. And actually, I came to Vancouver with a student visa, and I did my master's in counseling psychology here in Vancouver.
Oh,
That's how I
fantastic.
ended up here, and with the absolute intention to work in psychedelics. So it became my calling, because after my LSD experience and using psilocybin and MDMA and ayahuasca for the integration of the LSD experience, I managed to come out of my depression, and I knew very well that nothing would have helped. I mean,
Mm.
I did everything that was possible, like therapy of all kinds, and then I realized that probably there is a whole bunch of people for whom the regular methods would not be beneficial, and
Mm.
that we would need to open these new doors to healing. So I decided to devote my life to that. And I sold everything in Hungary. I had 2 apartments, my car, and everything you can imagine. And I put it into my education here in Vancouver, and I came here.
Wow, that is amazing. That is really amazing. What was your kind of time frame? Because I know a lot of people, especially with a lot of the media that has covered and a lot of the money that's being dumped into the pharmaceutical industry to talk about psychedelics, I think there's a misperception of do it once and you're better. You know, there's like, you know, and I think there's a lot of people coming. Yeah, people are coming out and really sharing like, no, actually, this is the starting point. So if you could give like a time frame from when you first experienced LSD and then when, you know, as you went through the process, like, was that years? Was that months?
Years,
you know,
years, absolutely years. And I would say in my case, because you know, I mean, at that point, this whole concept of processing and integration was non-existent. I mean, we started to talk about
really hard to find then.
Right? So we started to talk about processing and integration around, I would say, 2012 or 13, when people realized that, holy shit, I cannot just let somebody crack open and then just let them be. So I was kind of left alone with my experience, and I think that's why it took me longer than what I normally see now with my clients who are held and supported following a big experience. So for me, I would say it was 2018, 4 years.
4 years. Yeah.
4 years.
I mean, that's, but without support back then, that's pretty phenomenal, actually.
Yeah. Plus, you know, my therapist was in Vancouver, in Hungary, talking about LSD. Like, there was really like zero support, like zero societal support, zero professional support. So that was, I think that's why I needed more time. And I must say that my Buddhist practice was my strongest anchor. So that's something that I would recommend to everybody who tries psychedelics, that I believe that some kind of a spiritual practice is kind of, well, if not necessary, definitely a super powerful, strong aid to process and integrate a big psychedelic experience. But now what I normally tell my clients is that, and I work with developmental trauma, early childhood trauma, birth trauma, prenatal trauma, I normally tell them to give me 2 years. Wow. That's kind of the time frame. That I see can actually work. Addiction, eating disorder, major depression, major anxiety. That's kind of the time frame that I work with.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that it's really helpful to hear the different, especially because we're in a Western model. Most people who will be watching this or hearing about this, there's diagnoses that people go, I need help with this thing. But once this is my experience personally, and also with just friends and colleagues and folks in the professional field. It's not, you have a diagnosis, but that's like the symptoms, you know, these are the symptom box.
Oh God, yeah.
But then there's this whole world when you go into a psychedelic experience where it's like, oh, this might've been womb trauma. This might've been, you know, something that, you know, it's so much bigger than that this is just a symptomatic experience that then becomes it's to, you know, for lack of a better word, it's a spiritual journey, because it's integrating a whole entire person.
Exactly.
And it's something I think the Western model doesn't necessarily have a context for. It attempts to do so, but I think it's a beautiful time and place that we're in, that we're pulling from. You know, you have people that are saying, here's my diagnosis, help, you know, and it's like, okay, well, let's crack the Pandora's box open and give support throughout that process. And it's really, I commend you for dedicating your life to it, because it's definitely an uphill battle of not only education about how this process works, but also to share with people that it's not an overnight thing.
No, it cannot be a quick fix. No. Yeah. And honestly, that's why everything is trauma. Everything. Yeah. Depression, anxiety, eating disorder, alcoholism, addiction of any kind. And those were the coping mechanisms. Those, basically, the work starts with making friends with my depression, making friends with my anxiety, making friends with my eating disorder, because it kept me alive. Yeah. And then we can go down and see why I had to pull in those coping mechanisms, why I had to shut down and ending up depressed, why I had to be always alert, right? Always on guard. and that turns into anxiety. Why I had to self-medicate with food, why I had to self-medicate with alcohol, or why I needed to exercise crazy control that ends up as an eating disorder. So it has to be a long journey, and it is a journey into oneself. And that's why I'm saying spiritual practice, because spiritual practice is about pausing and looking deeply.
Yeah.
And this is what most of my clients have to learn, because we spend so much time in the head. We spend so much time in doing, being productive, doing, going, more, that actually becoming still and silent is scary. So that's one of the things that we have to learn in this therapeutic setting, that it's safe to be still. It's safe to be quiet. And it requires practice. And that's why I say 2 years. And then sometimes people say, oh, that's too much. But then I tell them that, darling, you have lived like this for 45 years.
Right. It's a lot of behavioral shifts. It's also a lot of belief shifting.
Like, there has to be enough time so that the growth is sustainable. Because if you grow too fast, you break.
Right.
It's just as freaking simple as that. So it really has to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and then they eventually arrive at a new way of being.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It sounds like, and just to clarify for those that are watching who may have an interest in microdosing versus macrodosing, what you've described is you had macro doses of LSD, ayahuasca, psilocybin, MDMA.
Absolutely.
Macro
like
being
one big journey. Like a full day journey, full day experience. Absolutely. Microdosing can totally be beneficial in the processing and integration phase following one big psychedelic experience. And a lot of my clients managed to put their antidepressant down because of the microdosing. They could switch it to psilocybin.
Right.
So, but as I told you, that's not my field. That's
Just to clarify, just so that they understand,
absolutely.
Some people
so
might
these are
be
big experiences, big experiences that normally last, I would say, 7 to 24 hours.
Right. Yeah. So, in your experience, when you, obviously it's a progression, but did you feel like there was that the LSD experience was and then everything else integrated, or was there little micro bursts of new insight that came from, because I can speak from my experience knowing that ayahuasca was my primary support, and I use other modalities, meditation, other psychedelics that integrated some of those really big experiences. And I actually haven't done a large LSD experience in a very long time. So just to give juxtaposition for people in perspective, it sounds like the first experience was LSD, and then how long until you did another experience of anything, just to give people perspective?
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend to wait at least 6 months before you do anything following an LSD experience. But you must know that I belong to the more conservative end of the psychedelic community. I always advocate for less medicine and more integration. And, it's neither good nor bad. This is just how I can provide safety for my clients. So from my framework, you have like one high dose LSD experience, and then you do talk therapy, processing and integration. I always include the body. It's always somatic. It's always spiritual. It's somehow standing up from the experience, which is very demanding, both physically and emotionally and mentally, as you can imagine. And then, if necessary, I sometimes work with MDMA, mushroom, or sometimes my clients go to an ayahuasca experience. But that's kind of, MDMA is definitely, I call it a fine tuner, like fine tuning some stuff and introducing some love and compassion into the mix, because LSD on a high dose is, I call it the revealer. Nothing remains hidden. You get the full download. It's just so much that the mind cannot comprehend it. That's why we need about a year for everything to actually arrive in the awakened consciousness from an LSD experience. Now, I recommend psilocybin and ayahuasca following an LSD experience for grounding. Those are plant medicines, right? They connect you with the earth. They connect you with this more, with this human bodily experience that we live on this planet, because LSD is very much out there.
Yeah. I think a
And
lot of
it's
people would
good to have
describe,
a, yeah.
yeah, I think a lot of people would describe DMT as that same way, that they just like,
Oh yeah,
boom,
absolutely,
way
absolutely,
out there.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, DMT is well, but that's 15 minutes or 20,
Yeah.
and you are in a high dose LSD for like 24 hours, out of which I would say 7 or 8 hours are very, very intense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a
Yeah.
lot. That's a lot to
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. Agreed. Yes. Could you talk a little bit about, you mentioned already your Buddhist practice. Is there other things that you can recommend for people to integrate? Because I think there's a lot of people who have just gotten their hands on some kind of
Yeah.
psychedelic,
Yes.
and they're out there without community still, even
Yes.
though we're in a place where they could
Yes.
find it, but they don't know where to look yet.
Yes.
What other tools that are non-chemically altering would you
Yes.
recommend for people?
Yeah, totally. So what I normally tell my clients, I always tell them what worked for me. And for me, definitely my Buddhist practice, which is a Vietnamese lineage by Thich Nhat Hanh. So I'm very conservative there as well, that I made my commitment, and that's my lineage, that's what I practice. And a very intense and disciplined yoga practice.
So body-oriented practice.
1,000,000,000%. And that's what I normally tell them, that, darling, I don't know what works for you, but choose something for your heart, choose something for your mind, choose a spiritual lineage. And just because for me it's Buddhism, for you it may be art, gardening, I don't know, dancing, music, something. Find something that gives you spiritual alignment, where you feel whole, where you feel aligned, and find something for your body. And just because for me it's yoga, for you it might be running, swimming, hiking, I don't know, but involve the body, include the body. Super important, extremely important. We underestimate, and I'm so happy we're talking about it, we still underestimate the importance of the body in these psychedelic experiences.
Yeah.
It's an enormous blow that our system gets. And by now we know that body and mind are one. And eating crap, drinking alcohol. I mean, we all know that there has to be a diet preceding a big psychedelic experience. If you did ayahuasca, probably you had the 2-week diet. That's what they run with, super freaking strict, super severe. I always ask my clients to have a 1-week diet before we work with LSD. But just in general, if you can make that more of a priority following a psychedelic experience, to take good care of the body. And when I say good care of the body, what do I eat? How do I sleep? What is my exercise routine? How much time I spend in nature? These are super important things, very, very important things in having a solid container for the experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I mean, it's not that people don't recognize the body, the vehicle is important, but I think because it's such a big mental shift that people go here and they're thinking about this. But you're very much correct in that some experiences can be 15 minutes. They don't feel like 15 minutes, but then there are ones that are 24 hours. But then I think a big part of the psychedelic experience is recognizing that even though you're not still in that journey space of that day or a couple days or a couple hours, you have weeks and months after that your brain chemistry changes, that your physiology changes, particularly with ayahuasca and other plant medicines as well. They do have a cleansing effect. And a lot of people find, especially those that have never done an actual food cleanse, oh my gosh, my digestion just changed in a major way. I all of a sudden have no desire for X, Y, and Z. I was a vegetarian for 20 years and I sat up in an ayahuasca experience and I was like, I need a steak. Didn't even remember what it was like. You know, it can go one way or another, and it's
absolutely
not always. Yeah, but that you may have these large shifts, days, weeks, months after in your physiology, in your desire for things. People can slow down considerably if their world is often sped up, and that might be uncomfortable. Because especially in a metro area, I grew up in LA, lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for 15 years. Slowing down is not the most easy thing for me.
Not part of the game. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Right. But it's necessary to heal, especially to integrate these medicines. Do
Yes.
you have any other practices, wonderful resources you've already offered, that people could explore, or maybe something that they could look into? Like, do you have some information on a website that you could share, or something where people can, one, get in contact with you, but two, also find other resources that may support their work before,
Yeah, I'm
during,
not,
and after?
yeah, I am not the right person for that because of the
Okay.
nature of my work. I'm hiding under the table. I mean, I risk a lot doing illegal work, right?
Gotcha.
And I really refrain from interviews like this, and I don't like to give talks either. So I really, at the same time, I find it very important to share what I know, because I belong to the ones who have been doing it for longer than most people. And
Mhm.
at this moment, I know we have the research, but I still believe that the most valuable resource we have is experience. So
Yeah.
I believe it's important that those of us who have been doing this work for a long time, our voices are heard. Um, so yeah, I unfortunately I cannot offer you websites or resources, and even how to find me. That's another tricky thing. Like congratulations, because I you found me on LinkedIn. Good freaking job, because I really don't put myself out there, but somehow people find me, and obviously it's mostly word of mouth. But sometimes they find me. I'm registered at the British BCACC, British Columbia Association of Clinical Counselors. Some people find me. I mean, as you can imagine, I don't say what I do, but there are some hints, and then people kind of figure out that maybe she's. But yeah. So I'm not connected to the mainstream of information either way, to be honest.
Gotcha. No problem. And I can
Yeah,
also edit this video if necessary to
yeah.
sort of cut out that particular part. Are there any, I mean, you already said that you had to go the hard route because you were without resource. Are
Mhm.
there any things that you wish that you had during your exploration period, aside from an integration therapist or specialist?
Yeah, yeah. So definitely, I would say community.
Yeah,
People who have had a similar experience, where I
yeah,
could have shared what happened to me. So like immediate community of not only like-minded people, but people who have taken the same path.
right.
And I would also like to say a supportive community in a larger sense, in a societal sense, to live in a place where this approach is embraced, welcome, not judged,
Yeah,
um, because that also made it pretty difficult
yeah.
in Hungary. Um, you froze a little bit. You're back. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Um, so I would say that like the container, the immediate and the larger container would have been nice,
Yeah, yeah.
because I felt so alone, right?
Yeah, yeah, I know. I shared a little bit before we started recording that I was part of the Psychedelic Society in San Francisco, and for
Mm-hmm,
anybody who is looking, there are international psychedelic societies. That is a
mm-hmm,
place for community. It definitely, back in 2008, not a thing. I think it was started around that time, but there was a pause that had to be taken for various reasons. But there are societies all over the world, people
yeah.
who share these experiences, and I think luckily
Well,
we're in a
obviously,
time.
I'm sorry. I mean, obviously, I don't have to say maps.
Of
Maps is
course,
like the,
of
yeah,
course,
of
yeah,
course, like the big one. And then there is a Maps Canada
right.
for people in Canada if they want to connect with Maps Canada. But honestly, that's all I know.
That's okay. That's okay. No, it's wonderful to hear the perspective of those that have gone, well before this massive explosion of
Yeah,
interest in this, because we're learning what people really need to integrate this in a way, because we've done Western approaches for a very long time, and then there's been alternative approaches in various different cultures for hundreds of years. These medicines have been part of a lot of people's culture, maybe not LSD necessarily, but
hmm,
psilocybin, ayahuasca, um,
hmm,
some of the other plant medicines, ibogaine.
hmm,
These are like, when you're brought into your tribe, you're welcomed with this as
hmm,
a part of rite
hmm,
of passage, or we
hmm.
just don't have those in modern society in a lot
Yeah,
of ways, except for getting your
yeah,
driver's license and
Yes.
being able to vote,
Yeah.
things like that. You know, so these medicines have tradition, but we're in this strange limbo space of bringing them out of the older traditions and allowing them to take part in our westernized society. And
Yeah.
your work is very important and necessary in that process. And so thank you on behalf of everyone who's
Thank
probably ever
you.
worked with you.
Seriously, thank you so much. And there is just one thing I want to comment on. I do find it important to talk a little bit about the chemicals,
Yes,
LSD
please.
coming from a lab and MDMA coming from a lab versus ayahuasca, psilocybin, ibogaine, and so on. The plant medicine movement is freaking strong. Thank God. Beautiful. They are beautiful teachers, powerful healers. Amazing that there are more and more practitioners working with them. And I believe that there is like a natural trust, just because we are humans and we are living on this planet, that they come out of the earth, and then it's easier to connect with those medicines spiritually and emotionally. Now, there is some apprehension around LSD in particular. LSD has a very bad rap. It had it kept bad company during the 1960s, and because of the not careful set and setting, a lot of horror stories are tied to LSD. So
Well,
I
yes,
really,
that was also political, but yes.
so I really would like to make up for it a little bit and just have a look at the history of LSD. That it comes from Albert Hofmann, Second World War, Switzerland, and accidental discovery of this extremely powerful substance. And I just want to note, at least for me personally, how important it is that it was kind of given to humanity during its darkest hours, right? Second World War. And I kind of consider it as an urban medicine,
Yes.
As opposed to the plant medicines, which are more about nature. So I do find it extremely potent and powerful and beautiful and loving, healing medicine for those of us who were conditioned in cities, who live this urban, freaking fast-paced lifestyle. And who are overwhelmed by the anxiety of this Western life that we have created, and who suffer from the intergenerational trauma that has been trickling down from generations that they received at the moment of their birth. So I truly see that LSD can be such a powerful healing medicine in very different ways as plant medicine. And I believe that let's make peace with the fact that we live in condos, and apartments. Most of us do. Of course, it would be amazing to live in a yurt, in a field, but that's not the reality for the majority of our population, especially here in North America or in Europe, where most of my clients are from. So all of my clients. Well, I have one in Australia. But anyway, so city people, and I look at LSD as an urban medicine.
Yeah. It's such a great perspective, because I think people do come and maybe they'll read an article on something and they'll be like, well, what about this medicine? I don't know enough. I don't have a context. So all of this is really helpful, because I think it's obviously going to be individual for a lot of people, but they do work on particular neurotransmitters. There are different pathways that there's already established research to say this will help if you've got anxiety. Maybe ibogaine's not your best bet, but something that is something that's going to give you insight and calm your system. LSD depends on the person. It doesn't necessarily calm, but it does give a lot of information to then digest and say, wow, okay, I understand that I can understand the source of this anxiety now, which is different for a lot of people.
And that's another thing that I want to comment on, that I never offer a medicine experience without knowing the person. So
absolutely,
the people have to be in therapy with me. We have to have a very solid therapeutic alliance, trust-based. I normally tell my clients that probably we need 3 to 6 months of preparation just to see whether this medicine would work, whether this medicine would be safe, whether this would be the right medicine of choice at all. So it's and actually that's one thing that I would like to say, that there are still practitioners and even clinics offering like a weekend LSD or a weekend medicine experience of any kind. That freaks me out. That freaks me out. No, seriously. Like,
I feel you on that.
you know,
Yes.
I genuinely believe that just as, and now talking about processing and integration is commonplace. Everybody talks about processing and integration. We still don't talk enough about preparation.
Yes.
That there
Agreed.
has to be a solid foundation put down between practitioner and client before they enter the medicine zone, so that trust is not a question.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just grabbing my plug really quick. I'm just getting a little bit low on energy. I apologize for that. But yes, I absolutely agree with you on preparation, because I think a lot of people, particularly because, well, they might be on pharmaceutical, for instance. They've gone that route. They need to come down from that and titrate down, depending upon what their circumstances. But but there is. I'm so glad that you brought up preparation, because it is something that, you're right, you could go online right now and find a retreat that is 3 days. But I know from my experience, because I also did a lot of underground work, I had one of my first ayahuasca experiences blew me completely out into the netherworlds, and I didn't know how to integrate it into my day to day. And there was about 3 weeks time where I was like, it wasn't that I lost sense of reality. It's just that your reality expands, and you then have to go, how do I think about life when I know that this other world is here? How do I even go back to work? That's a big problem.
Yes,
people
absolutely.
have that experience just 100%. Going to Burning Man.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because preparation is definitely key. The work itself, finding a qualified and supportive person that you trust, and that doesn't come with just calling up and saying, hey, I'd like to do medicine work with you, because it still is an illegal field, both in my home country and in both of the countries that you've lived in. So it's emerging. There's a lot of information to be digested prior to moving in this direction, and then make sure there's support afterwards. For sure. Yeah. I'm so glad that we hit all these points. That I actually had questions to ask you about this, and you hit all of them. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yeah. So if there's anything else you would like to share in terms of, I know that you're mostly underground, so sharing your contact is totally fine. You don't need to do that. But if there's anything else you'd like to share before we...
Yeah, maybe just one more thing, that that psychedelics are not a must. And that's one thing that, I really want to say, like, I would say 50% of my clients don't have to use psychedelics for their trauma, because we can do beautiful, deep, profound trauma work just by talk therapy, including the body, including a spiritual practice. Check, all good. They can do psychedelics for expansion, for exploration, for exploring their consciousness. But as for when it comes to trauma, I genuinely believe that it's not a must. However, there is the other 50% of my caseload who could spend all the time and all their money on talk therapy, on traditional therapy, and they could just not deal with it. And I just so maybe this is one more thing that I just want to add, that the way I do this work is, when it comes to trauma, that we explore this cognitive space as much as we can. And if we reach the walls and the client is still stuck, then is the time to introduce medicine.
Yes, I agree. So I definitely...
I don't define myself as a psychedelic psychotherapist. I define myself as a trauma therapist. And if necessary, we lean on these beautiful teachers.
Yeah. They are resources. They're insightful. They are supportive, but not necessary. I completely agree. Sometimes they can give insight where, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of sayings about ayahuasca and LSD that it's 30 years of psychotherapy in a day and all of that. But imagine if you did get 30 years of psychotherapy in a day, you're not going to catch all of that. It takes behavioral changes. It takes integrating new belief systems, because if an atheist comes into an ayahuasca experience and then they talk to God, that's hard. You have to think about, and I'm not saying either are right, I just, if there's a new set of information brought in, that's a whole other
Yeah.
ball of wax. And even just working with someone who maybe had extreme physical trauma, sexual trauma, and just did somatic work with you, that opening up the pathway to the body again is really scary and can be, and that takes work. And maybe a psychedelic would be too overwhelming. It's all, there's value in all styles of healing. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because you're right. Not everybody needs to do it. It's not a quick fix. It's not something that's going to just fix you up and patch you up and go about your life. Some people believe that's true, but we know better now, particularly those that have been doing it for 10 plus years, 20 plus years. They recognize like this is a journey. That's why they call them journeys. Yeah. Thank you so very much for your time, and I'm really grateful.
You're very welcome. Absolutely, and thank you.
Yeah.